Hey everybody, this is Linda Misegadis, and you're listening to An Unconventional Guide to Success, the show that talks about real life with real people for those of you who are interested in learning from others the steps they took on their journey towards success as defined by them. Welcome to the studio, Scott. It's so nice to see you.
Linda, always a pleasure. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
I've got to be honest. So we talk about being honest on this show. I am having one heck of a morning. Our little puppy, we just had, we just rescued a new French Bulldog puppy. We've had him for just about a month. Friday, he fell and broke his elbow. And so we were in orthopedic surgery yesterday with him. And so it's just been a little crazy. And then I woke up this morning and I'm like, what is this on my face? I'm like 55 years old. You don't break out, but I think it's stress. So that's what I'm going with. So that's how I'm doing, Scott, in the spirit of honesty.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you what was going on with your chin. I mean, that's a huge,
right. I know. It's like, holy
blemish.
Cow, we have a fourth. Yeah, we have an extra guest with us this morning. So
we're going to go ahead and introduce her.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. My sidekick. So, but we are so lucky today to have Paul in the studio with us today. So thank you so much, Paul Goudreault. And I'm going to have Scott's going to read Paul's very impressive bio.
Yes, I actually am. And thank you, Paul, for being here. Paul and I met at a Dell Tech webinar that we had done together and immediately hit it off. And I'm glad you're here today. I want to introduce everyone to your bio, Paul. Paul Goudreault entered the workforce as a geologist and created a successful 45-year career in the engineering and consulting industry. He has held numerous roles, including founder and CEO of two multinational environmental consulting firms, and an owner and CEO of construction manufacturing company. Paul has lived and worked globally in more than 30 countries and has logged more than 100 trips around the world. He has designated and implemented organizational transformations, including purchasing and integrating acquired companies, aligning organizations with their strategic intent, and designing and leading account management programs. During his career, Paul has been responsible for $2 billion. That's right, Linda, $2 billion in sales.
I know. I was thinking I was patting myself on the back for doing 50 states, and Paul's been in 30 countries. And, I've got my little $1 million budget. Paul's got his $2 billion portfolio. So, it's incredible.
Incredible. And Paul is the founder partner of, Paul, help me out.
Enoran Partners.
Thank you. Enoran Partners, a business and career coaching consultancy. He recently authored Own Your Career. No one else will. And I have it right here.
Love that. Yeah.
A career development book for the career enthusiast. Paul is actively providing strategic insights to environmental consulting and engineering firms. And in addition, Paul is a director of SampleServe, a digital transformation tool designed for environmental laboratories, consultants, and clients. Paul, impressive. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Well, if you're around for 45 years, you ought to do something, right?
I hear you.
That's a long time.
Yeah, I sure as heck have not been around for 45 years. But I hope to aspire your successes. That's incredible. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, and I know we're going to talk a lot about careers and stuff today, but, it's really been an exciting, adventurous, challenging, fun career.
Yeah.
And, if you can package that all together as a young career enthusiast today, I mean, what a great life you have in front of you, right?
Yes.
So it's really kind of it's a cool story. I'm proud of my bio, but it was even a better journey, myself and my family, my kids, my wife, the dogs, the cats, it was just a good life, a good career.
That's awesome.
So, thank you.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
This is great. Linda always likes to kick us off with an icebreaker before we come in and start peppering you with questions. So do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, I do, for sure. Thank you. So Paul, if you could hang out with any cartoon character, who would you choose and why?
Well, to be honest, I never really was into cartoons very much.
Yeah.
But the person that stuck out for me, which might be a little ironic, is Beetle Bailey. I don't
Oh,
know if you remember
interesting.
Beetle
I
Bailey.
do remember Beetle Bailey.
He
Yes.
was the inconspicuous, some would call him lazy,
Oh,
Yeah.
private first class in the Army.
okay.
Yes.
And what I took away from him was that he was always challenging authority. You know, the command and control structure of the military didn't quite work for him. Because one thing, he didn't really want to do anything, but the other thing, he always kind of was cyclical to that whole program of having people telling you what to do all the time. And
Yes.
at the end of the day, he was generally the guy who had the most common sense
Yes.
and came out ahead of the game,
He
right?
did. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
And I kind of reflected on him as kind of my guy. I mean, again, it's kind of odd because he wasn't a very ambitious guy, which I consider
No.
myself fairly ambitious.
Yeah.
But the whole context was he really came out of it okay, you know, and he was kind of the
Absolutely.
right guy in the room, and he challenged authority, and it worked out.
I
So
Yeah,
love it.
it did.
I
fun.
love it.
Yeah.
That is
Only
very
those
funny.
people who have had 45 plus year careers will know who we're talking about, but that's really impressive, Paul.
I know who Beetle Bailey is.
Hey,
He was in the comics on Sundays.
I'm kidding.
So you had to read, Scott. That was the challenge.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's it.
thank you, Linda.
Yeah,
Thank you.
touche.
Yes,
Touche.
absolutely. Well, that's a great one. I really like that. It's always fun to ask that question because it does kind of challenge you a little bit to think about
Yeah.
why would I want to hang out with that cartoon character? But there's always, as I've reflected back over the years, there's always a lesson in cartoons, because it was even in comic books, it was a safe way to send a message without drawing a lot of backlash. And so you
Right,
could kind of get away with things that you wouldn't normally get away with through
right.
comics and cartoons. So yeah,
Yeah. And they actually broke a lot of cultural barriers, you know,
they
comics
did.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Whether it was how the cartoonists dressed the characters,
right.
uh, you know, uh, Beetle Bailey showed a belly button once, I guess. I was Googling this yesterday, and that was prohibited to show belly buttons, you know, in your cartoon strips. They introduced different cultures, different races. You know,
Yeah,
they did a lot of things for the culture, you know, that we live in today.
Oh,
So it is interesting to look
yeah,
at comics. Yeah.
that's
yeah.
very
It
true. And it
definitely
actually
is.
changes, Linda, I'm dying to hear yours, but in the theme of what he just said, mine's going to change for this episode because, like
Oh,
Paul has said, culturally, the Wonder Twin powers and I can't think of the name of
yeah,
them, but those
yep,
guys brought in different cultures and they were kind of chameleons in what they transformed into to solve problems and move and advance issues. And so
yes,
I'm very much a chameleon when I need to be too. So I
yeah,
would
Yeah.
I would say
very
for the
much.
sake of moving culture and being a chameleon, I'm going to change mine to those guys today.
I like that. No, that's good. And I think it is interesting. Today I was thinking, as since we're talking about that, he's not a cartoon character, but Stan Lee is someone who, he was so, integral, obviously, the master behind so much of that. But a lot of what he did was driving conversation around cultural differences. And you just didn't know it. You didn't realize it. It's only like even now as an adult, when I look back on some of those cartoons, even Bugs Bunny, all of those, they had so many lessons in them when you go back and you see through the eyes of an adult instead of seeing through the eyes of a child. It's amazing what you learn in all of that and the messages they were sending.
Totally,
So yeah,
totally. I remember the
I
lunch
love
breaks
it.
of the Wiley. Was it Bugs Bunny used to chase the guy that used to put the sheep on, and then I forget the cartoon, but they would literally
That was the
the
Roadrunner.
Roadrunner.
That was a
Yeah, that
It
was a
was the
Roadrunner.
Roadrunner.
Roadrunner,
Yeah,
and they would literally take
yeah.
lunch breaks from their work, and
Yes, they would.
and that
Yeah.
they taught us inherently how to separate work from real life, right?
Yes, because they could be friends when they weren't working.
Right.
Yeah, no,
Tom
it's
and
very
Jerry.
true. It's very fun. Yes, yeah, it's very true. It's fun. So no, that's great. Well, thank you for indulging, Paul. That's always just a fun way to get things started.
It's
Yeah.
funny. Paul and I relate on so many different levels as far as paying it forward and taking our 40, 45-year careers to the next generation.
Yeah.
Paul, your book was really inspirational in that it has a lot of snippets, if you will, and a lot of practical tidbits, as you call them, in here
Yeah.
for the next generation to kind of take in and put their own context around, really, because they're just almost one dimensional. They have a lot of meaning, but the meaning is inferred on the reader, right? So
Right.
what inspired you to write this book? What was your motivation behind this?
Well, it was really my kids. I mean, they're not kids anymore, right? They're young adults, but I was it was about years ago when I wrote the book, and I was watching them develop their career. What subjects to choose in school, what to do as your first job, not liking maybe the first job, thinking that's the end of the world, which it isn't, right? And just thinking about this kind of course that people take through their career. And I'm actually a groundwater freight and transport modeler by training. So I'm a technical guy that likes to work with models, right?
Okay.
Predicted
Yeah.
occurrences that can be wrapped up into an analytical model or numerical model or whatever. So
Yeah.
I felt like a career had a model. There was a model of how you develop your career.
Hmm.
And so I started with this concept of the career life cycle model, and it's called ADAPT. And there's 5 stages to that model, from acquire to transition, right? And that kind of got me excited about saying, okay, you're starting your career now, and really I can kind of explain to you why you're in the position you are today. You
Yeah.
know, you're acquiring skills. You may not know exactly what you want to do. You're following your passion. How's that translate into a career? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but who cares? You're just starting out, right? And then you'll get into a develop stage and an apply
Hmm.
stage and a produce stage and a transition stage. Those are the 5 stages of a career life cycle. Now, it doesn't fit every career, obviously, right?
Right.
No model fits every situation, but it's a close approximation. And so then I started writing these different stages and reflecting on where I was during those stages and where I think maybe employees are now. And it was really from the voice of the employee. Now, most of the work I do now is either coaching employees directly or coaching their managers and leadership to understand where their employees are
Hmm.
on their career life cycle and being able to make meaningful contributions to that career along the way.
Yeah.
So and then I wrote the manuscript. We took a trip to Belize with the family. I made them listen to the manuscript. My son and daughter helped me make it a little hipper.
Yeah.
Um, and then I published it. So it's been a fun journey, and since then I've been doing a lot of work around the book, just helping companies and employees navigate their careers.
Are the 75 top 75, or is this like how you got, like, it ended up being 75 because that's all you could think of?
Right. Well, I started writing the book about 2 years before I retired.
Mm.
And so, I was always an observant kid, maybe like Beetle Bailey, I don't know.
Yeah.
Shocker.
Yeah, shocker. So, the last 2 years of my career, I would always just kinda sit back and listen to people and take little tidbits. Like one of the tidbits is sit in front.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't mean actually sit in front. It could mean sit in front, right?
Sure.
When you're at a meeting or there's a
Yeah.
town hall or there's a client meeting, get to that first table, not the last table. Get to the first one, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because you're noticed,
Hmm.
right? You're present, you're engaged. It tells the leadership that you're there and that you're interested, right? So that turned into a tidbit. I was sitting in a meeting once and I was going, where am I
Yeah.
going to sit? And I always sat in front, and I'd always switch. If there's multiple day meetings, I'd always switch my seat, right? So I could sit
Mm.
by somebody new,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which isn't another, I shouldn't do that. It's another tidbit,
You
right?
should.
Sit
That
by
is another
somebody
good
new.
one. Yeah.
That'd be another tidbit. But that's how I accumulated these little
They're
tidbits. So
great.
to answer your question, I had a list of 100 and some,
Yeah.
and I just kind of went to the ones that I favored, and I had 5 chapters, and 15 per chapter worked out. So
Awesome. Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and what I love about just the title of your book on Own Your Career, No One Else Will, is I think that so often, and I know I was a victim of this, is that I allowed myself to sit and wait and thinking that
Mhm.
someone was going to notice me, right? That if I did a good job, if I worked hard, if I produced, that someone was surely going to reward that behavior, right? So I was
Yeah.
sitting and waiting for someone else to guide my career versus owning it and saying it's really not anyone else's responsibility to say, hey, Linda, you're doing a great job, but I think you should be doing this and this. Now, I did have some great people along the way that helped, provide a little bit of guidance, but I wasn't quite astute enough to recognize oftentimes what they were saying to me and how to translate that into, it's your responsibility really to take this and
Right.
decide what direction you want to go. So I really love that.
Yeah. And, I think both employers and employees struggle with that.
Yeah.
From the employee standpoint, you just described a perfect scenario where someone is waiting for something to happen to
Yeah.
them. Maybe, and really, to give some grace to at least my generation, and I think it's the tipping right now, but, our parents had a job for life.
Yes.
Not everybody, but
Yeah.
generally,
Yeah.
they were taken care of by the company. Well, my generation really didn't have a job for life, and we were kind of the frog in the boiling water, right? We had to kind of figure out, okay, this is changing. We better
Yeah.
do something different. And I
Right.
think today it's really changed where employees are taking a lot of ownership in their career, and that's a little
Yeah,
challenging for employers, right?
it is.
Well, I don't
Yeah.
really like what I'm doing right now, so I'm going to do something different.
Yeah.
Well, okay, what do we do? What do we do to help you build your career here, right? So that
Right.
challenge is happening more and more now. The other thing that's interesting is that career almost is a no-no word for a lot of younger employees.
Interesting.
They
Yeah.
see a career as something maybe that
Ball and
I've done,
chain.
right?
Ball and
Like,
chain. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just laid it out, went through all these, corporate cycle and life cycle and all that stuff.
Right.
And, they don't want that anymore.
Mm-mm.
But the reality is you're going to build a career
Mhm.
regardless of what you do.
That's right.
Yes.
Whether you're the guy who came out and fixed my dents in my car this yesterday, or
Yeah.
the guy that picked my boat lift up, there's a career there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You just have to figure out how to piece it all together. So at the end of the day, you've enjoyed a challenging career and a great
Mm-hmm.
life, right? Because it's
Absolutely.
hard to have a life without, I think, a good solid
Well,
career.
Paul, that's
I
really
agree with that.
foundational too,
Yeah.
right? Because the next generation needs to understand that what we're talking about, and you and I have this in common, is the foundation pieces of networking and relationships and
Mm-hmm.
goals and habits and sort of setting yourself up for whatever the actions are that help you make money. But success is in the happiness, right? And so the theme of
Right.
career is in the theme of happiness and success, whether it's boat lift
Yeah.
guys, lawn guys, or career guys, and all of which
That's a
Right.
could
good
be
point.
true. As a career guy, I'm a leadership coach and I run a consulting firm. I know you did the
So
same thing.
open up your book, Scott. See
Yeah.
what it. Open up your book, first page,
Yeah.
my signature. What does it say?
It's this book is not
I signed it. Oh, I didn't sign. You bought that
I
one, right?
did.
Yeah. Well, I
I
usually
didn't get
sign
my
it.
free signed
I'm
copy,
sorry.
Paul. What's up?
I got to send it to
Yeah,
you.
I'll pay.
Thank
I'll
you.
sell this to somebody else.
I'm sorry. The reason I interrupted was, when I sign, I say to a career and life well lived.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like
Right.
that.
Because that's what you have to put together. You
Yeah.
have to put that whole thing together. And that's
Right.
challenging I think it's much more challenging now for the young career developers
Yeah.
than it has been ever before. So,
Well, Paul, I'm curious since you do work with employers. So, what I think kind of makes some of that challenging is because we are not providing the right training to managers and, in many cases, HR professionals. So, oftentimes, what they do is they provide, like, we just have gone through this at our organization where we receive these templates to do individual development plans for our employees. And, it's all about helping them think through, like, where do they want to take their careers. And a lot of it too is on taking away from the tradition of the hierarchical environment, so that to grow up doesn't mean that you have to be in management, but what does that look like? And so I think that where our younger people are struggling is they're looking for that guidance, but they're looking for it from perhaps managers who don't have the proper training to give that guidance. So I'm kind of curious, like in the work that you do, is that a part of it? And if it isn't, what guidance would you give?
yeah. I don't know if this is a tidbit or not, but it should be. I wrote a blog on it, but I say managers can be selfish, right? Because if you're a
Yeah.
manager, you're given the resources to execute on your assignment. So
Yeah.
do you really want your top performer to go find a new job?
Right.
Eh,
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure. It takes a pretty mature manager,
It
right, to say,
does.
you're doing a great job. I can't give you anything more. Let me help you find another job or role or within the company or outside the
Yeah.
company. So managers make poor mentors
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
And so the mentoring concept is one where I believe it has to be a manager once removed or twice removed, because then that person sees a bigger part of the organization, first of all.
Right.
So they understand what other opportunities there are for people. And they're not so attached to the performance of that individual to perform for them. And so I think one thing is a mentoring program and structuring that so it's meaningful,
Hmm.
internal mentors versus external mentors,
Mm-hmm.
the mentoring game kind of gets,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Overplayed.
administrative at some
Yeah.
point, overplayed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with that.
Mm.
But, my mentors were primarily people outside the organization. I mean, I had managers that were very insightful and could learn the organization to me. They could teach me about the culture.
Mm-hmm.
They could teach me about opportunities. But my mentors, where am I going next,
Mhm.
Right.
really came from external parties.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I like that too, that idea that because you're right, managers, especially frontline managers, you're absolutely correct in that. Why would you guide your best performers out? Because that's now you've got to start all over again in the
Right.
process of trying to bring in a whole new crew and get them where they need to be. And so
Yeah.
that's really good advice. I think when you're thinking about that from a management structure and who we're asking to guide these individuals. So
Yeah,
Right.
it's
that's a good
funny
one.
because as we're chatting about this, I kind of resonate a little differently in my personal experiences. I found myself to get really sticky in jobs that I was overqualified for because my managers became mentors, because
Mm,
my
Oh,
relationships became really valuable to me and they were growth mindset relationships. And I've been
yeah,
really fortunate in pretty much a 180 from what we're talking about. And it was hard for
that's
me
great.
to make
Yeah.
decisions to move. And it's an
But
awareness
that's
I'm
the
sharing.
loyalty factor, right, Scott? I mean, would you say that's a little more tied to the depth of the relationship, partnership, loyalty side of it, perhaps? Would you say that? Like maybe
No, I
you
think
had a
that's
harder time than separating?
no, that's more of who works for me. I have a harder time.
Okay.
I mentor them out of a job, and then because I do that, they don't want to leave. Like
Ah, gotcha.
but
Gotcha.
personally it was more fraternity based, and I only share that not to contradict but
No,
to
it's great insight.
recognize there are two sides to that coin and
Yeah.
people can
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
beneficial. Bottom line with Paul is I'm 100% a networker, right? I looked within my organizations at higher levels to communicate with those folks. And I also went with my direct reports, like my managers
Yeah.
and my directors.
yeah.
And I was in a big corporate environment. So it served me well to do that as it served Paul to do it in sort of a different way, but sort of the same
Yeah.
concept exists. You can't do it
Right.
alone, and you need someone guiding you through it. And
Yeah.
that's such a
Right.
critical factor people overlook. They think they bring their college degree and all the experience, and
Yeah.
there's so much gray in that. Really, there's a lot of gray
Yeah.
in that.
It's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. We've got a guest who's going to be joining our podcast named Larice Brown, and she talks a little bit about that, especially in her particular generation, that they were, kind of taught that you go to high school, then you go to college, and then you get a job, and then you buy a house. You get married, buy a house, whatever the model is, but that was all just a story. And now that generation is really struggling in that because they went and got those degrees and they've got huge college debts and
Yeah.
they're not even working in the field that they went to school for in many cases because that's not where the job was. And so I think that's a really valid point, Scott, that we get caught up in a model of what someone told us we were supposed to do versus I think what Paul is kind of
Yeah.
suggesting, which is you got to figure that out and navigate through it and really kind of
Yeah.
find that path forward. And the other thing I think that's really important in all of that too, Scott, and I'm curious on your thoughts around this, is that if you think about what you did and stepping out and kind of going above, going outside, that was very courageous and could have been a little risky, right? Because you were choosing to have relationships with senior level executives, and that could have been viewed as hopping, over, like jumping over your manager. So maybe reflect a little bit on that, and then we can get Paul's thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I didn't actually have that hop sensation because I managed my direct leadership in a way that permitted me to move into those
Interesting.
places. So
Okay.
I
Well,
was
talk a little bit about that. Like dig in a little bit though more on that. Like, what do you mean by that?
very
That it
respectful.
permitted you.
Well, I was very
Okay.
respectful, and I asked for permission to engage that next level of leadership after I knew they were receptive. So it
Okay.
was still my
Interesting.
story. I was doing it, but I made sure that leadership was involved in that with me as
Okay.
I went forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So
So it wasn't that you were operating around your direct line management to go
mm-mm.
and develop relationships. You were working within that
I forced the hand.
management structure
I
still,
forced the
right?
hand of my
Yeah.
leadership to understand I was, going to support them by my inquiry
Okay.
to support myself. Paul, what's your take on
I
that?
think,
Yeah.
yeah, a couple of things. One is, navigating your career. I call it career aspiration. I never had a career aspiration, right? Until
Yeah.
probably when I was 55-ish.
Mm.
Then it was retirement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that. I feel that.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
That was
Yes.
my career aspiration. Well, guess what? If you started a little bit earlier in your career aspiration, you might be able to put some logic behind your next moves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a hard thing, and it's yours. I mean, I stress this in the book. The career aspiration is yours and only yours.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, who cares about whether other people think you're doing the right thing or not? And secondly, you're the only one that's going to be able to understand if you've achieved it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
You're going to
Yeah.
be the one that's going to sit at the end of the day like I am and saying, did I do everything I could have done with my career? Am I happy with it? Now can I help others, et cetera,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I always talk about a career aspiration, and it doesn't need, and that's where I think there's more opportunities and challenges now,
Mm.
because there's so many career paths you can take.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's more challenging for younger career developers than it was for us. But
Yeah.
anyways, the
No.
other thing about networking, in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
the way I did is I tried to become indispensable to the company,
Yes, I
right?
did
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
I managed the largest account for the firm, half the
Yeah.
revenue.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
Wow.
as well, and I'm not saying that pridefully, I'm just saying if you can take on assignments that are meaningful for the company
Mm-hmm.
and do a good job, you're going to get the attention of your leadership.
Yeah.
You're also going to be hopefully respected by your peers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And if you can do those two things,
Mm-hmm.
it was an easy choice. The CEO who put me as CEO after he left, he says, Paul, this is an easy choice. You manage the largest account and people like working with you. He said, that's all I got to do. So, those choices become easier for leadership if you make yourself indispensable
Yeah.
and if you have the respect of your peers.
Such
No, I
important
like that. I
lessons.
think that's
These are
good.
it's so
Yeah.
nice to hear you say all this, because part of the crux of our podcast is to pay it forward to the next generation and get context around these snippets or tidbits that, quite frankly, my book is aligned with too. But I like how you've make it digestible. And then the anecdotes that follow suit give people food for thought and how they want to
Mm.
approach networking internally, being respectful of the leadership, and the simple thing of be likable and be sticky in an
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do a good job. I think that's kind of the key too, is that do a good job.
Yeah.
You are getting paid. So
Yeah.
it isn't, it is
Not
important
just
that you
one
do a
thing.
good
It's all
job.
those things collective.
Yeah.
Make a career.
No, it
There's another
is.
tidbit in my book. It's called Earn Your Keep.
Yeah.
And I remember this when I lived about 45 minutes from where I worked, and at that time, or the airport, whatever, is about 45 minutes. So whenever I get home, and I didn't have a garage attached to my house, it was an outbuilding. I lived in
Okay.
rural Wisconsin, so you can
Yeah.
tell. But anyways, it was an outbuilding, and I had about a 30-second walk to my front door from the outside garage to my front door. And every time I came home, I said, did I earn my keep? What did I do today
Yeah.
to earn my keep?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some days were just disastrous, right?
Right.
I didn't get through my first bullet of to
Right.
do, right? I went, man, I got to focus a little bit. I mean, I can't go through this, blowing the whole day away.
Right.
And then some days I'd say, I went above and beyond. And, it's just a measuring stick. And it took me 30 seconds. Now, did I do it every day? Probably not. But, it was that recognition that you earn your keep and you
Yeah.
have to continue to do that. So
No, I like that.
I got plenty of
I
antidotes.
like
You
it.
know
No,
me.
I love it. That's
Yeah.
great. Hey, Paul, I'm curious, like, what made you shift though from being a geologist to consulting and coaching? I mean, that's like, especially since when I think about engineering and geology, those don't feel like the type of careers that lend to that type of personal, emotional connection with people.
Yeah.
So, what made you make that jump?
Well, it's a good question. I think I started, as I'd said, as a groundwater fate and transport modeler, which is very analytical, right? You have
Yes.
inputs, you have outputs, and you mess around in between to get it so it does what you're supposed to do. But I found early in my career that it was important to be a good communicator because I worked with teams to communicate assignments as a project manager. So after I was a hydrogeologist, I became a project manager, and a project
Okay.
manager is about coalescing a team to execute on an assignment, right,
Mm,
or a project.
mm.
Yes.
And I found there that it wasn't necessarily that you had to be a good scientist; you just had to be a good communicator. And so that was something that I worked on first. And then I felt like everything else was a little routine or redundant. After you manage one project, you can manage another project, another one.
Right.
They all kind of look the same. You have your work breakdown structure, all that
Rinse,
stuff.
lather, repeat can get pretty boring. Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I think I might have gotten bored to answer your question. I said, give me a
Interesting.
client assignment. I like to manage a client, because that's more
Yeah.
dynamic. You're outside the company. You're really a translator for what the client needs and what the company can deliver. And it was a lot funner for me, if that's a word.
Yeah.
And so I kind of built that as my career, and I really built it around account management, which
Okay.
I had to have technical understanding because the
For
client didn't
sure.
want me to talk stupid stuff about geology or
Yeah.
hydrogeology or stuff like the environmental science. So I had to have enough of that, but I also had to have approachability, good communication skills, good follow through, et cetera, et cetera. And that became my career path. I enjoyed that the most.
So
Interesting.
switch that over to coaching now. Tell me what that means to you and how that ended up being the next layer of importance to your career, the
Right.
coaching aspect of
Well,
it. Yeah.
I think I've told you this story, Scott, but I was anticipating retirement, and my sister-in-law was up visiting. This is probably 3 years before I retired, actually. And she said, "Paul, what are you gonna miss about your job when you retire?" I said, "My diamond status and my paycheck."
Yeah.
And I went right there. I went, yeah, it's time for me to retire. And so at that point, I actually started thinking, all right, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And how can I continue to help? And our industry, the environmental consulting engineering industry, is it's small compared to like tech industry or automotive industries or other things. It's a consulting niche, and I know a lot of people, and I felt like I could pay it back. And
I
so
like
that's
that.
what I started to do with my book. And then as I retired, I figured, can I help companies and employees, be more successful? So
So
Yeah.
coaching, is that for me, is that you, I just want to elaborate a little bit on one, how do they reach you and what does a coaching look like to you? Like the tactical aspect of it.
Mm.
mhm. Most of my coaching is with company leadership teams.
Okay.
So companies that are 500 employees
Yeah.
generally would be the midpoint size. And they contact me because they want to do some future planning, some strategic planning.
Okay.
And so I'll help them do some megatrend analyses, determine what the megatrends are that might be facing them, like climate change or energy transition or resource scarcity or the workplace, these megatrends that are happening.
Hmm.
And then help them by facilitating their leadership teams identify key strategic imperatives that they need to undertake over the next 5
I
years.
see.
And those usually are 3 to 5. And then I construct imperative teams with them to execute on those strategic imperatives in their organization. So
Interesting.
that's generally what I'm doing now,
Okay.
and that's the coaching I do.
Okay.
So it's both individual and as
Yeah, so
teams.
I was intrigued by the individual aspect of it. So SWOT analysis, those kind of things, and the consultancy you're doing for your strategic planning, I would imagine. Is that right?
Mm.
So
Right.
then when you
Yeah, we do the mega trends, and then we say, okay, well, what are the threats and
Mhm.
opportunities around these mega trends? And then, we parlay those into specific initiatives they can
And
take moving
that's
forward.
awesome. And then you help them sort of organize the teams and move it along from a consultancy perspective. When you talk about individual coaching, this seems to be this is always of interest to me because I struggle sometimes with whether or not I'll hang a shingle and help people individually as I put on my coaching expertise, the
Mhm.
Mhm.
certifications and the process that one follows and helping them self-discover. Is that a layer of coaching, or are you more strategic advising coaching and offering experience coaching? I'm just curious what the tactical aspect of individual coaching
Right.
looks like.
So I'd say there's team coaching,
Okay.
the leadership team,
Yeah.
and then there's individual executive coaching,
Okay.
which is the CEO or the VP or a business development manager
Yep.
who I can help coach their skills moving forward, right? So there's one CEO who just received the CEO-ship about 8 months ago.
Okay.
And so I'm helping him make that transition. The company is very similar to my old company. And, there are a lot of shared experiences,
Great.
and I can predict or maybe,
I love it.
give them a heads up on things that are going to occur in the future and just be
Mhm.
prepared for them.
Awesome. How do we reach you,
Yeah.
Paul? If do you are you selective, or do people, is there a website that people can go to for?
Yeah, I have enoranpartners.com,
Okay.
and you can reach me there, or, you know, I'm on Facebook
Got it.
and LinkedIn and everything
Got
else.
it.
So just hit my name, you'll search for me, and you can find me.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Paul, I'm curious a little bit since you do a lot with strategy. The new the new buzzword is the VUCA world. I'm assuming that you've heard that term since it's thrown around all the time these days. I'm curious, what's your thought around that? And as individuals are thinking of navigating through that, so as we're talking about young people and taking control of your career, when we are living in a volatile environment right now, and it is hard to make those decisions or know if you're heading down the right path. Like, what type of advice are you providing around that?
Yeah. Well, that's also a good question. When I look at today's world, when it comes to like technology and consulting,
Mm-hmm.
partnerships are ultimately one of the most important things you can do.
Yeah.
And I structure and the structured partnerships, right? Not ones that are laissez-faire. Oh yeah, I know Fred,
Yeah.
and Fred and I have gone to college together, and da, right?
Right.
But these are structured partnerships, and you have to imagine how you can deploy your service or your technology through multiple partners, right?
Mhm.
So my school was, I go to a client, I talk to them about their needs are. They say, "Here's what's coming up, Paul. I don't know about this. This is kind of hairy and bad. I got to find a solution for this one." Okay, I'll find the solution for you, right? Now, what I think now you have to be prepared not just to go to the customer directly, but you have to go to partners, people that interact with that customer in some way and offer either all or part of your services through those partners. And so it's a much more complicated deployment of your solution sets through partners. And then, of
Yeah.
course, the partnership challenge is how do you find partners that share the same business ethics and
Mhm.
Right.
corporate value systems, and show up on time and deliver the results and a
Yeah.
reflection of you, all that stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Very
But I
much.
think the I hate to call them partner channels, but that's kind of
Yeah.
what they are,
Yeah.
have to be robust, and you have to be very agile with how you deploy your solutions, either
Yeah.
consulting or technology.
It's funny,
I'm
Paul.
curious.
Well,
Oh, go ahead,
hold on,
Scott. I'm
Linda. I
sorry.
just
I don't
wanted to
mean to dominate.
highlight.
You go right ahead,
I know.
please. Yeah.
Well, hey.
Yeah. I can't help it.
I
I
can't
just
help
got to
it.
ask the question. So.
But I wanted to highlight, Paul, that you're talking with people who are of the same ilk, in the notion that Linda and
Hmm.
I met in a partnership capacity. She
Yeah.
represents the Ultimate Kronos Group, Kronos, and I own and operate WorldGate. And the
Mhm.
partnership that we have forged over the last, say, 10 years, Linda, while it
Yeah.
ebbs and flows, and one of the things I wanted to express when you said about choosing a partner and that partnership, the thing that comes up for me is clarity, communication, and trust. It
Yeah.
doesn't start overnight, but it does start with intent. And the
Yeah.
intent of partnering is so critical as one builds their career.
Mhm.
Linda and I are still in partnership with our other work, which is implementing
Mhm.
time systems within school districts, HR systems within school districts. I'm
Mhm.
the consultant, the implementation firm. She's the sales and marketing and product side of the firm. Would you say, Linda, for all
Yeah,
intents and
for sure.
purposes?
Definitely, yeah.
And so we've partnered together and we've learned to be better at partnering together
Mhm.
such that we were also able to forge that fraternity reference you made a minute ago. So it went the other way for us. And here we
Mhm.
are now paying it forward together on an Unconventional Guide to Success podcast, bringing in guys like you that kind of highlight that.
Mhm.
And I'm really, really thrilled to have you today because as you've been talking, you've been hitting on every single cylinder of our concepts: communication, partnerships, networking, relationships, peak performance, project management. I mean, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
You are on point, and I love it because it's just a validation for our listeners that there is truth
Mhm.
in what we're all trying to share. So I just wanted to
Mhm.
take a
Mhm.
minute to diatribe that for all of us to kind of
Yep.
put a bow around the importance of this from so many different economies, right? What
Yeah.
you're doing in your
Right.
industry, what I'm doing in my industry, the coaching aspect, the consultative aspect, the partnering aspect. And we've got representation right here. So I
Yeah.
digress, but Linda, I just wanted to highlight that for our viewers to kind
Yeah.
of make that,
No, it was good.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it was a good observation for sure. So one of the key words that you had said there, Scott, was trust. And what I was going to ask Paul about is trust to me is the hard one because especially in that partner ecosystem,
right.
because, I think about at the end of the day, we are oftentimes partnering with our competitors as well. And, it's a dog eat dog world out there. And so we're all trying to compete for those
Kill
same
or be
dollars
killed.
in many, yeah, that's right, in many cases. And I'm just kind of curious your thoughts around that trust factor because I think the reason why Scott and I have such a strong partnership and relationship is because we're almost too straightforward in our conversation sometimes. Like we just lay it all out.
Yeah.
And because of that, we trust each other that we're going to do the right thing. But that's not common. And so I'm kind of
Mhm.
curious what your thoughts are around that.
Well, I was reflecting on my mentors in preparation for this call, and uh, I know it's going to sound silly, but my mom was one of my largest mentors. She was a career professional woman, back in the 70s when that wasn't real common.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And she's an Italian immigrant, more or less, second generation. And she taught me about truth, honesty, and do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how I approached my relationships with people. Truth sometimes was hard to do because I'm a scientist, I'm just
Right.
going to tell you what's truth is. But you have to be delicate with truth sometimes.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes, you do.
Truth and
Yes.
So
yeah.
I learned the delicacy of truth.
Yeah.
And then the honesty was pretty
Yeah.
easy because I'm Beto Bailey. I'm honest, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And then the follow through. If I
Yes.
told my mom I was going to do something, I better do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, she would hold me accountable for that.
Yeah.
And I think, it's a little cheesy, but those three things go a long way in developing relationships with
I
people.
think that's
Yeah.
where
I don't
Linda
think
and
it's
I,
cheesy at all.
no, and that's, I
Yeah.
think, where Linda and I got into a place where when she invited me to partner with their organization and WorldGate and Kronos were starting to figure out their dance, I
Hmm.
100% did what I said I was going to do and at all
Hmm.
Mhm.
cost. And
Yeah.
that then formed that sort of trust and it
Hmm.
expected it back because it can't be one-sided.
Right.
So if
Yep.
I'm
Mhm.
investing, you're investing, and off the dance goes. And
Yeah.
Linda, you said something about that's not common. I think it's not
Hmm.
common that people try and work under that premise, which is why we're together today.
Yeah.
I do think
Interesting.
for me, it's
Yeah.
been very common in some of the significant relationships I've had that I've invested in. And I have found success in seeing people craft that dance I think
Mhm.
people should be aware that it's a dance worth crafting from our
Yeah.
dialogue today. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. No, I
I
like
think if I
that.
can just add one other thing, there's a lot of noise in organizations, right? I call
Yes.
it noise.
Mhm.
And depending on who you're talking with in the client organization or your partner organization, I think that will indicate how responsive they are to a partnership.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Meaning, executive leadership should be very open minded about partnerships.
I
You
agree.
get to a project manager who's bidding a project and wants to control a cost and thinks they need to get the lowest bid possible, partnerships may not be in their dialogue.
Right.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
good
And
point.
so you do have to create that the right, you know, point of contacts and partner contacts in order for that to
Well, and that
happen.
might
Yeah,
be where
that's a really
Linda and
great
I are
point.
different. And that might be back to her. It's not common then, because you're right. I, as a
Yeah.
company owner, will absolutely low bid it to get the business and plow right through doing what I said I was going to do without all the
Mhm.
extra noise of the
Mhm.
attraction I have for Linda and the work and the style of things that we
Yeah.
operate under. So that might be a better way of agreeing with your
Right.
it's not common then, because it can go both
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
It can. Yeah. No, and I like that noise. When I worked in government and then working in the private sector, I was laughed because I said I understood the politics of government, even if they didn't make sense. At least I understood. I will never understand corporate politics because they're not rooted in anything. It's usually just emotions, feelings. It's not generally rooted in any common sense or in anything that's that important. So it's an interesting thing for sure. Well, Paul, you mentioned mentors. Who has been your most important professional mentor?
Yeah. So personally, when I look at mentors, I think about different groups. And let me just back up a little bit. And
Yeah.
Scott, I think we've talked about this, but something that's interesting to me is, um, I think career development is a personal journey. It's something
Hmm.
like I said, develop your aspiration. You're the only one that will be able to measure it if it's complete or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Like a golfer, I look at what's always fascinating is I look at golfers. They win the tournament and they say, we really did a great job.
Yeah.
We put the right things in place. I'm going, we.
Right.
I mean, you're the one out there
Right.
swinging the club, right?
Yeah.
Hitting the ball. There ain't no we out there. It's you,
Yeah.
buddy.
Yeah.
But I think about that, and I think that's the way we need to act. Is we need to
Yeah.
have a team around us. And so
Hmm.
when I think about coaches, I think of those people that can teach me the basics, fundamentals, the dribbling, the
Yeah.
15-foot jump shot, whatever analogy you want, but the basic fundamentals of your job.
Right.
Then I think about mentors, and I think about internal and external.
Hmm.
And external, I think of family and
Hmm.
friends.
Yeah.
Family and friends can be strong mentors, especially early in your career.
Yeah.
The crazy uncle or the sane aunt or,
Yeah.
the grandpa who's lived, 80 years. I mean, those
Yeah.
are all informal mentors, but you can learn a ton from your family and friends. And then
Absolutely.
also externally, I was attracted to my clients. My clients were my strongest mentors
Yeah.
because what they would do is they would ground me on, Paul, what do you need to do to serve me? And how can you do that the best?
Yeah.
And the toughest clients were my best
Hmm.
mentors because they told me exactly what they wanted and they held me accountable.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, did they help me with my professional development? They did in a way that they really reinforced, my innate abilities. They reinforced the things I needed to do to be a successful in my career. And so
Yeah.
they reinforced that. And then internally, I always had, one or two executive managers that for whatever reason would provide me the time to talk to them about the organization.
Hmm.
And I did that in a way that um, came with no hidden agenda.
Right.
It came
Yep.
open-minded.
Yeah.
I wasn't pitching an idea that I'd heard from my colleagues. I
Right.
wasn't trying to change the course of the company. I just want to learn from them on where he or she was going
Yeah.
and what they needed me to do to be successful. And I thought that was and again, I would ask for mentorships. I think that's something that people should do now is ask for a mentor if you
Hmm.
don't
Yeah.
have one
Hmm.
Yeah.
and pick your mentor because generally if you get assigned one, it ain't going to work.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, I s so summary, external, internal. clients, friends
Yeah.
and family, executive leadership. Those are all
It's all
people
part of
you
the
should train.
package. Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
all part
I
of the
like that.
package.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, that's great. Well, Paul, we always like to end our show with three questions, and so our first question for you is, what is a common myth about your job or field of expertise?
Well, for me, and you asked this question earlier, is it ain't science anymore. You know,
Right.
I was a scientist, right?
Right.
Yes,
When someone
yes,
says, "Oh, you're a geologist. Oh, you must know how to identify rocks." Well, I do,
right.
but that's not what my
No one
career
cares
is.
anymore.
Right,
It's shifted.
right, right. Yeah, no, that's
It's
very
super cool
interesting.
when you're on a beach and people bring a rock to you and you know what it
Yeah,
is, but
I'm
that's
sure.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I love that.
But
That's a good point. Yeah, I like
you know,
that.
I think it's it can be said for really any profession. If it's not technical, it's not, you
Yeah,
know, it's not nursing, it's taking care of people. It's not,
right.
you know, engineering, it's providing solutions. It's,
Right.
you know, it's not what you think it is. It's something
Yeah.
different.
Well,
No,
and the
that's a
common
really good
theme of what
one.
we've talked about for the last hour is really underlying any product, to your point.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's really what I get jazzed about too, is that it's agnostic to geology, it's agnostic to nursing, it's agnostic to
Yeah.
any tactical position, these things that we've
Yeah.
been chatting about. I love that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
like that. That's a
Yeah.
good one. So our second question is, what is the most important lesson you've learned over your career?
Well, I think it's about guiding your future.
Yeah.
You know, and Linda, you'd mentioned this. You can't wait around.
Yeah.
You can, but don't get me wrong. That's an
Yeah.
option.
It's a choice. Yep. Yep.
It's a choice. But if you can be more proactive and determine where you want to be, uh, you know, what your life looks like, what your career looks like, you know, I think 3 to 5 year increments is the best you can do
Mm-hmm.
with a long term horizon of, you know, doing something after your career, but, you know, just planning for your future.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's really good.
It's funny, when I was being mentored by my leadership back then, I used to, what about 5 or 10 years from now? And how is this going to
Yeah.
affect my kids' college? I didn't even have kids yet. And I remember my mentor saying to me, just go with like the 1 month, 6 month, 2 year plan
Yeah.
when
Yep.
you're planning
Yep.
your
Right.
career, because all those
Yep.
2 year snippets become your career. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
That's true.
foundation we've talked about against the tactical assignments of what you're doing all become one big career play. So I
Yeah.
like that you highlight that it's not, it just keep it simple. Keep it a couple
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I have
Yep.
a feeling that it takes 6 months just to understand what your assignment is.
Right.
It
Right.
takes 18 months to be effective.
Right.
Yeah.
And in 2 years, you should be looking,
Next
you
move.
know, for something
Yeah.
different. Next
Yeah.
move,
Yeah.
right? So
No.
I think those are those. There is some reasonable kind of sequence of how you look at your assignment, your role, and what's
Yeah.
next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I like that. That's good. So our last one is, what's one lesson your job has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point in their life?
I have 75 tidbits in my book.
Yeah, I love
Oh,
it.
is
Yeah.
that this right here? Oh, now we're all holding it up.
Yeah.
I don't want
I
to cover
love
up your
it. That's
name for
good.
any viewers.
Yes, that's
Yeah, sorry.
right. That's it. That's great.
No, you know,
What's the one that jumps
well,
out at you, Paul? The one that
Yeah.
you bang us here with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that you come back to
I
all the
know.
time.
All right, the best tidbit. I don't know if this is the best, but I have a story as well. So, you know, I was interviewing for a job with the previous CEO who I replaced, and I think it was a department manager or something. I think I was out of school for 5 to 10 years. You know, the industry I got caught in was very rapid growth. You know, we grew
Mhm.
our business from 5 to 500 people in 5 years. We're
Wow.
Inc. 19 on fastest
Wow.
growing companies. So it was a very rapid career growth. So I say I was only out of school for 5 or 10 years. You know, I was interviewing for kind of an executive role, a VP of
Yeah.
one of the divisions. And you know, I wanted to pitch everything I'd done, right?
Yeah.
All my accomplishments. And he
Yeah.
said, Paul, at this point, I'm paying you for your judgment. I went,
Interesting.
okay.
Hmm.
And that kind of freed me and kind of gave me the real sense that, you know, you're right, you build your career, your resume over time, right?
Yeah.
You want to show that you can do certain things, but at some point in your career, you're the leadership or the company, the board director is going to judge you on your judgment on how you make decisions,
Mhm.
Yeah.
because those things are not easy, right? As you get advanced in your career, the decisions become more complex. And so being able to have good judgment, taking all your experience, both professional and non-professional, and making the right decision is really what, at the end of the day, um, you're paid to do.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a good
I
one.
like that. That's a great one. Yeah, that one is really
There's
good.
74 more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where would I find those, Paul? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, did you write a book or something?
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's
I
been a
love
pleasure,
it.
actually.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm sure our guests and our audience enjoyed listening to you as much as we did, for sure. So thank you so much for being with us today. It's been very insightful, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to have you here. So
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
yeah, and thanks, Scott. Thanks
Yeah.
for being here.
Always good to
So I
see
think it was
you.
a good
And
one.
I look
Yeah, you
forward
as
to next
well.
week when we, do it again.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes.
Really
Wonderful.
appreciate it. Looking
Thanks so
forward
much,
to
Paul.
what the future holds, for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. An Unconventional Guide to Success is an inspirational, motivated series hosted by Scott Montgomery and Linda Misegadis, recorded on Riverside.fm. Music, editing, and production by Logan Misegadis. Check out Scott Montgomery's new book, How Did You Get Here, and all the helpful related materials at www.howdidyougethere.com. Thank you for joining us on our journey. If you would like to reach out to us, our contact information is in the show notes.